Tipu Sultan, the Tiger of Mysore, they called him a tyrant, they called him a fanatic, they called him a savage king who refused to bow, but history whispers another name in the shadows. The Tiger of Mysore, a ruler who made the world's greatest empire tremble, a man whose weapons flew into the sky before Europe even dreamed of rockets. A Muslim king who stood alone, sword in hand, against the rising tide of British colonization and chose death over surrender. This is not the story you were taught. This is the story the empire tried to bury. This is the story of Tipu Sultan. In the late 1700s, India was bleeding. The Mughal Empire had collapsed into fragments, and the British East India Company, a trading corporation with an army, was crawling across the subcontinent like a slow, unstoppable disease. They didn't arrive as conquerors, they arrived as merchants, and by the time India realized the truth, it was already too late. One kingdom stood directly in their path, Mysore, a land of iron hills, dense forests, and fierce warriors. A land ruled by a man who had learned something most kings never did, that the British did not negotiate, they consumed, and at the heart of that resistance stood Tipu Sultan, born in 1751, the son of Hyder Ali, a military genius who rose from nothing to become ruler of Mysore. Tipu was not raised like a palace prince. He was raised like a soldier. From childhood, he learned the language of steel, the weight of strategy, the art of war. By the age of 15, he was already riding into battle. By the age of 17, he had faced the British for the first time and survived. And from that moment on, his life would become a single, unbreakable vow. Mysore would never be enslaved. The British underestimated him. They thought him young. They thought him reckless. They thought him another native ruler who could be manipulated, bribed, or broken. They were wrong. Tipu Sultan studied them. He watched how they fought, how they moved, how they lied. And while the British relied on muskets and arrogance, Tipu began something revolutionary, something that would change warfare forever. Rockets, not fireworks, not toys, weapons, iron cast rockets decades ahead of anything in Europe, capable of flying farther, faster, and deadlier than anything the British had ever faced. When launched in volleys, they screamed through the sky like metal demons, tearing through enemy lines, exploding horses, shattering morale. British soldiers wrote about them with fear in their letters. They said the sky itself attacked them. They said the ground shook when Mysore's rockets flew. These weapons were so advanced that after defeating Tipu, the British shipped them back to England, where they became the foundation of European rocket science. The rockets that later inspired the Congreve rockets. The rockets that would one day light up European battlefields. The rockets that would lead humanity toward modern missile technology. But the world rarely gives credit to the defeated. Tipu Sultan was not just a warrior, he was a visionary. He reformed administration, built roads, reorganized revenue systems, strengthened trade, and welcomed foreign diplomats not as masters, but as equals. He wrote letters to the Ottoman Caliph, to the rulers of Afghanistan, to Napoleon himself, seeking alliances to break the grip of British power. To the British, this made him dangerous. A king with armies could be defeated. A king with ideas could not. And so the British began writing their own version of Tipu's story. They painted him as a monster, a religious extremist, a barbarian, because nothing terrifies an empire more than a man who cannot be controlled and cannot be silenced. The wars came one after another. 4 times the British marched on Mysore, 4 times Tipu met them in battle. Each war was bloodier than the last. Each time the British returned with more men, more money, more betrayal, because that was their greatest weapon, not guns, not cannons, but treachery. They bribed generals, they turned allies, they whispered poison into the ears of Tipu's own court, and slowly the circle tightened. The final siege came in 1799, Sriangapatna, the capital of Mysore surrounded. British cannons thundered day and night. Walls cracked, streets burned, the river ran thick with smoke and blood. Advisers begged Tipu to flee. He refused. They urged him to surrender. He laughed, and then he spoke words that would echo through history. It is far better to live like a lion for one day than to live like a jackal for 100 years. On May 4th, 1799, the British breached the gates. Tipu Sultan, sword in hand, fought at the front lines like a common soldier. He was not found hiding in a palace. He was not found begging for mercy. He was found dead among his men, his body pierced by bullets, his face still turned toward the enemy. The tiger had fallen. When the British entered his palace, they didn't just take gold, they took his weapons. His plans, his diaries, his legacy, they looted his kingdom and rewrote his story. In British textbooks, Tipu became a villain. In colonial history, he became a footnote. In imperial memory, he became an inconvenience. But among the people of the land, he became something else entirely, a symbol, a warning, a reminder that resistance is possible even against empires. Today, statues of Tipu Sultan still stand, not because he was perfect, but because he was fearless. He made mistakes. He was harsh at times. He ruled in an age of brutality, but he never sold his people. He never bent his knee. He never accepted chains. And that is why he is remembered, because empires fear men like Tipu Sultan, men who refuse to be owned, men who innovate. Instead of imitate, men who choose death over submission. The Tiger of Mysore did not lose. He was outnumbered, outgunned, outbetrayed, but he was never defeated because his greatest victory was not a battle. It was this: he proved that the British were not invincible, and once that truth entered the minds of the people, the empire was already dying. So when you hear his name, when you hear the echoes of rockets in the sky, when you hear the roar of a lion that refuses to bow, remember this: history is not written by the brave, it is written by the winners, and sometimes the truth survives only in the shadows. Tipu Sultan, the Tiger of Mysore, the king who fought an empire and became immortal.